My boss publicly shamed me for an error he made, so I recorded everything, took it to the board, and watched his legacy burn quietly. I'm a 29-year-old project coordinator working at a mid-sized tech company, and until recently, I thought my life was on track. I wasn't chasing fame or fortune, I just wanted stability, a career I could build, and maybe a little respect along the way. But what I got instead was humiliation so deep it left me shaking, betrayal that cut me to my core, and a revenge I never thought I'd have the courage to carry out. From the outside, my workplace looked polished. Modern glass walls, polished steel furniture, and motivational posters plastered everywhere. The kind of place that made outsiders think we were living the dream. But behind those walls it was survival of the fittest. People whispered in break rooms, shoulders tense, always watching their backs. And at the center of it all was Mr. Daniels, my boss. To the executives, Mr. Daniels was a visionary. He knew how to turn on the charm, drop clever buzzwords, and make people believe he was irreplaceable. But behind closed doors, he was different. Sharp-tongued, manipulative, and he had this chilling way of smiling when he cut someone down, like he actually enjoyed the fear in their eyes. At first, I kept my head low. I told myself, if I work hard enough, he'll see my worth. That was my mistake. I stayed late, fixed mistakes others left behind, and practically lived on caffeine just to keep up with his endless demands. And still, he never gave credit. He thrived on taking it for himself. There were moments, small ones, when I saw how he twisted stories in front of executives, making himself the hero. I should have seen it coming. I should have known what would happen when his ambition finally turned toward me. But I didn't. And the day it happened, my entire career, my entire sense of dignity, shattered in front of everyone. The longer I worked under Mr. Daniels, the more I realized just how dangerous his charm really was. He wasn't just tough or demanding, he thrived on control. Every meeting felt like a performance where he played the genius, and the rest of us were just props to make him look brilliant. I'll never forget the first time he humiliated someone on my team. Sarah, one of the sharpest analysts I knew, presented a report she'd worked on for weeks. It was solid, airtight. But Daniels leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said loudly in front of everyone, "Well, if this is the best you can do, no wonder our numbers are slipping." Sarah froze, her eyes watering, while the rest of us stared down at our notepads like scared kids. Afterward, he pulled me aside and whispered, "Learn from her mistake. Don't ever make me look bad." That line stuck with me. Day after day, he chipped away at us. If a project succeeded, it was because of his brilliant leadership. If something went wrong, it was always someone else's fault. I started noticing how he rewrote history in emails, subtly shifting blame, making sure the paper trail painted him as flawless. And people believed him. That was the worst part. The executives ate it up, while the staff carried the weight of his lies. There was this constant tension in the office air, like the walls themselves were listening. Conversations in the break room dropped to whispers the second he walked by. Some employees avoided eye contact altogether, afraid he'd pick them as his next target. And yet, nobody spoke up. Nobody dared. And me? I told myself I could handle it. I told myself loyalty would eventually mean something. That if I worked harder, if I stayed quiet, I'd be safe. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before he turned on me. And when he did, it was worse than anything I'd ever imagined. It all came to a head during one of the biggest presentations of my career. Mr. Daniels had handed me the project, a high-stakes pitch to a group of executives and potential investors. For weeks, I barely slept. My apartment looked like a war zone of sticky notes, empty coffee cups, and half-eaten takeout containers. I triple-checked everything, cross-referenced data, and built the slides so cleanly they could have been in a textbook. The morning of the presentation, Daniels breezed into the office like a king arriving at his coronation. He glanced at my slides for barely 5 minutes, then waved his hand. "Looks fine. Don't mess it up." That was his version of encouragement. When we entered the conference room, my palms were already sweating. The board sat at the long table, polished wood gleaming under fluorescent lights. Daniels opened with his usual charm, cracking a joke that made everyone laugh, then gestured toward me. "My project coordinator will walk you through the details." I launched into the numbers, confident because I knew them inside out. But halfway through, Daniel suddenly leaned forward, his face hard. He slammed his hand on the table. "Stop, this data is completely wrong. Do you even know what you're talking about?" The room went silent. My throat closed. I blinked at the slide, at the numbers he himself had approved just hours before. He jabbed his finger at the screen. "This is unacceptable. This kind of incompetence is why projects fail." Heat flushed up my neck. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to tell the truth. But the executive's eyes were all on me, their disappointment heavy, like I was some rookie who couldn't do their job. Daniels leaned back, sighing loudly like I had embarrassed him. And in that moment, I realized he had set me up. I was the scapegoat. And there was nothing I could do but stand there, frozen as my reputation burned. After the meeting, I walked out of that conference room like a ghost. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight, and all I could hear was the echo of his voice in my head. This kind of incompetence is why projects fail. Coworkers avoided me in the hallway. Some glanced up with pity, others looked away quickly as if making eye contact might tie them to my downfall. By the time I got back to my desk, my inbox was already filling up with emails. Not from me, but from Daniels. He had CC'd the executives, writing, "Unacceptable errors in data handling. We'll discuss corrective action." He made it sound like I was reckless, like I hadn't prepared. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands trembling on the keyboard. Every instinct told me to defend myself, to explain that the numbers came directly from him. But I froze. I knew if I fired back without proof, he'd twist it, make me look insubordinate. Later that day, I overheard two colleagues whispering near the break room. One of them said, "It's a shame, but what did they expect? You can't mess up in front of the board." My stomach dropped. Daniels had already poisoned the narrative. I tried talking to one of my closest teammates, Michael. I pulled him aside and said quietly, "You know those numbers weren't mine, right? He gave them to me." Michael sighed, glanced around nervously, and whispered, "I know, but it's his word against yours. Just let it go. Don't make yourself a bigger target." That's when it really sank in. I wasn't just embarrassed. I was alone. Nobody was going to risk their own job to stand beside me. And Daniels? He had the entire office believing I was the problem. That was the moment the anger started boiling inside me, hot and sharp. But anger without a plan was useless. For the first few days, I carried that humiliation like a weight strapped to my chest. I barely slept, barely ate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on the executives' faces, the smug curl of Daniel's mouth as he watched me crumble. I kept asking myself, why didn't I defend myself? Why didn't I call him out right then and there? But then it hit me. I couldn't win against him in the open. Not yet. He had too much power, too much sway. He knew how to twist words, how to manipulate a room. If I confronted him head-on, I'd lose. So I made a decision. If Daniels wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. I ordered a small voice recorder online. Nothing fancy, just something discreet I could slip into my pocket during meetings. The first time I clicked it on, my heart was pounding so hard I thought people would hear it. Every laugh, every shuffle of paper, every sharp edge in his voice. I caught it all. At first, I wasn't sure if I'd ever actually use it. Maybe it was just a form of self-preservation, proof for my own sanity. But it didn't take long before I realized I was sitting on a gold mine. Because Daniels wasn't careful. He was arrogant. In one meeting alone, he contradicted himself 3 times about project details, then laughed and said, if the board ever knew how messy this actually was, they'd lose their minds. I sat there, keeping my face neutral while my recorder quietly captured everything. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than shame. I felt power. It wasn't enough yet, but deep down, I knew this was the first step because Daniels had made me his scapegoat, but I was about to make him my downfall. Once I started recording Daniels, It became an obsession. Every meeting, every passing conversation in the hallway, even quick check-ins at my desk, the recorder was on. I became hyper-aware of his patterns, the way he shifted blame like a magician redirecting an audience's gaze. The first few recordings were enough to make me sick. Daniel's berating coworkers, mocking executives behind their backs, even bragging. "They'll never question me. I've been here too long." Each word felt like a nail in the coffin he was building for himself, only he didn't know it yet. Weeks turned into months, and my library grew. Some files were explosive. Him taking credit for entire projects, him admitting to altering data, him calling board members clueless old men. Others were smaller, subtle contradictions that, when pieced together, formed a pattern too clear to deny. The hardest part wasn't collecting the evidence. It was staying calm. Every time he insulted me in front of the team, every time he leaned back with that smirk, I wanted to scream, "I have proof. I have everything." But I bit my tongue. I had to wait. If I revealed my hand too early, he'd crush me before I had a chance. At night, I'd sit in my apartment with my headphones on, listening to hours of recordings, cataloging them, labeling them with dates and details. It felt like living two lives. By day, the beaten-down employee. By night, the quiet architect of his destruction. But the strange thing was, the more evidence I gathered, the bolder Daniels became. Maybe he sensed I was weakened. Maybe he just couldn't help himself. Either way, his arrogance was painting him into a corner, and eventually, he'd push me so far that I wouldn't have a choice but to use everything I had collected. And that moment was closer than I realized. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, in the kind of sterile beige office where bad news always seems to land. Daniels called me in with that fake smile plastered across his face, the one he used when he was about to twist the knife. "Close the door," he said casually, like we were about to share a secret. I did, and he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. "I've been reviewing your performance," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "And frankly, it's not good. Too many mistakes. Too many embarrassments. You're not meeting the standards of this company." I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Mistakes?" "Daniels, every single project I've handled." He cut me off with a smirk. "Enough. I've already spoken to HR. I'll be recommending termination." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. Termination. Not just embarrassment. Not just whispers behind my back. He wanted my career, my livelihood, gone. I tried to keep my voice steady. "You know those mistakes weren't mine." "You gave me the numbers," Daniels chuckled, shaking his head like I was a child. "And do you have proof of that? Or is this just your word against mine? Because if it's your word," he leaned forward, lowering his voice to a razor's edge, "you'll lose. You always will." I sat there frozen, rage and fear tangling in my chest. He wasn't just humiliating me anymore. He was setting me up to destroy me completely. And the worst part was, he was confident he'd get away with it. That's when I realized, the recordings weren't just leverage anymore. They were my only lifeline. If I didn't use them soon, I'd lose everything. The email from HR landed in my inbox the next morning. Performance review hearing. Attendance required. Just reading those words made my stomach twist. It wasn't just a meeting. It was the first step toward termination. The official stamp that would mark me as damaged goods in the industry. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen while the office buzzed around me. Phones rang, keyboards clacked, people laughed faintly at inside jokes, and I sat there feeling like my entire world was collapsing in slow motion. That night, I called my sister. I told her what was happening, how Daniels had twisted everything, how the company seemed to believe him. There was a long silence on the other end before she finally said, "Maybe it's not worth fighting. Just find another job. Walk away before it eats you alive." Her words stung because a part of me believed her. Maybe this was hopeless. Maybe Daniels was right. Maybe I'd lose no matter what I did. I barely slept. I kept picturing the HR meeting, Daniels smirking, the board looking at me like a failure, my career ending right there in that sterile little conference room. My chest felt heavy, like a cinder block was sitting on it. For the first time since this started, I thought about giving up, deleting the recordings, quietly packing my desk, and disappearing. But then, in the middle of that spiral, I opened one of the recordings at random. Daniel's voice filled my headphones. "They're clueless. They'll never touch me. I run this place." Hearing his arrogance lit a spark in me I thought I had lost. Maybe I was cornered. Maybe I was broken. But I wasn't finished. Not yet, because if I was going to fall, I'd make sure he came crashing down with me. I remember that night like it was a photograph. My desk lamp throwing a cone of light over a sea of printouts, my phone buzzing with messages I didn't want to answer, and the hum of the city outside my window. I'd been listening to the recordings for weeks, but now it finally hit me. These clips weren't just vindication for me. They were irrefutable threads that, when woven together, would expose a pattern. That pattern could not be shrugged off as, he said, she said. It had to be assembled cleanly, professionally, and delivered where it mattered most. I brewed another pot of coffee and started transcribing. My hands shook at first, my eyes stung from the blue light in the late hour, but the more I typed, the clearer my path became. I time-stamped every clip, wrote short bullet summaries, and highlighted the explosive lines. Daniels admitting he'd altered reports, mocking board members, boasting about scapegoating staff. I kept the language clinical. There was no room for melodrama. If I wanted the board to act, I had to present facts, not fury. I created 2 versions: a polished dossier for the board, clean cover page, table of contents, redacted names where needed, and a personal folder with raw audio files, file names matching the timestamps in the dossier. I burned the audio onto a USB and labeled it with a single, neutral folder name so nobody would get suspicious if they saw it on my desk. At 3 a.m., exhausted and wired, I drafted an email directly to 3 board members I'd once overheard called the real decision-makers. My finger hovered over the send key. If I send this, there's no going back, I thought. If I don't, I'm finished. I reread the dossier, checked the timestamps one last time, swallowed the hot coffee that had gone cold, and, with my heart pounding so loud it felt like a drum in my ears, I hit send. The notification popped. Message sent. The HR hearing felt like walking into an execution chamber. The walls were the same bland beige, the table too polished, the fluorescent lights humming with a sterile indifference. Daniels sat at the head of the table, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression smug, like a man who already knew the verdict. "Let's begin," he said smoothly, before HR could even set the tone. "This employee has shown a repeated pattern of failure, negligence, and embarrassment to the company. I've recommended termination." His voice dripped with certainty, his eyes flicking to me with the faintest smirk, as if daring me to speak. My palms were slick, my throat dry, but I forced my voice steady. "Actually, before we go any further, I'd like to share some evidence." The room shifted. One of the board representatives raised an eyebrow. Daniel's smirk faltered for the first time. I slid the folder across the table. The dossier, neatly bound, page after page of transcripts and timestamps. "Evidence?" Daniels chuckled, trying to sound amused. "This should be good. I didn't answer." Instead, I pulled out the USB drive and set it down. "These are recordings from multiple meetings. I suggest you listen to them." One of the board members leaned forward, curious, and pressed play on the first clip. Daniel's own voice filled the room. "The board will never know. They're clueless. I can make them believe anything." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Clip after clip played, him mocking the very people sitting at that table, admitting to altering data, laughing about throwing staff under the bus. By the third recording, Daniels was sweating, stammering, reaching for excuses that wouldn't come. For the first time, the room wasn't looking at me like a failure. They were looking at him, and for the first time, Daniels knew he wasn't untouchable. The meeting ended in chaos. HR paused the recordings halfway through, glancing nervously between the board members and Daniels. His once polished demeanor had shattered. Sweat beading on his forehead, his hands trembling as he tried to spin excuses. This is taken out of context," he barked, his voice cracking. Anyone can manipulate audio." But no one was buying it. The boardroom had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Daniels wasn't the predator anymore. He was cornered prey, clawing at shadows. One of the senior board members, a woman with a calm, razor-sharp voice, finally spoke. "Mr. Daniels, you are suspended immediately pending full investigation." "Hand over your badge." The silence that followed was thunderous. Daniels froze, as if the words hadn't registered. His jaw clenched, his face turned crimson, but he had no fight left. With shaking hands, he unclipped his badge and slammed it onto the table. When he stormed out, the door rattled behind him. For the first time in months, the room felt lighter, like the suffocating air had been lifted. HR turned to me. "We'll need you to stay for follow-up." "What you've done here?" She hesitated, then nodded with something like respect. "You may have saved this company a lot of damage, but walking out of that building later, it didn't feel like victory." My legs were heavy, my chest still tight with months of bottled rage and humiliation. People whispered as I passed, their eyes wide with shock. Some smiled, small, grateful smiles, but I couldn't shake the exhaustion that weighed me down. Daniels wasn't gone forever. He was suspended, investigated. His empire had cracks now, but part of me knew he'd fight like hell to rebuild it, and that terrified me. For weeks, Daniel's name was everywhere inside the company, whispered in hallways, dissected in break rooms, speculated about over late-night emails. The official line was suspension pending investigation, but the truth was everyone knew his reputation was bleeding out. Then came the desperate moves. He started sending long-winded emails to the board, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign. He even tried cornering a few employees in the parking lot, begging them to tell the truth about his leadership. But the recordings had already spread quietly, not to the public but within the higher levels of the company. His words were poison now. No one wanted to touch him. One night, I got a message from a colleague I barely knew. "You should know," it read, "Daniels tried blaming you in his final appeal. Said you orchestrated everything." My stomach turned, but the board didn't buy it. They'd seen too much. A week later, Daniels resigned, to protect the company from distraction. The announcement was bland, sterile, no praise for his decades of service, no glowing farewell party. Just a short email, cold and forgettable. And that was it. The man who once strutted around the office like a king, who humiliated me in front of my peers, who built his entire identity on being untouchable, slipped out quietly, his legacy crumbling into silence. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but instead, I just felt free. For the first time in years, I could breathe at work. People stopped looking at me like I was weak. They started treating me like someone worth respecting. And Daniels? He faded into obscurity. No scandal on the news, no explosive downfall. Just a quiet erasure, like his empire was made of sand all along. Sometimes silence is the loudest kind of revenge.